All right, we're back. All right, we're back. We've been talking about the mindset of the practitioner, but today we're getting into the actual, well, the hardware. We're looking at the physical setup Tuting prescribes in Evoking Eternity.
The hardware. It sounds so industrial, doesn't it? Like he's setting up a laboratory instead of a sacred space.
Hey, if you want to summon a demon, you might as well have a clean workspace. You don't want your ritual interrupted by a pile of dirty laundry or, an unorganized desk.
It's not about organizing, Paco. It's about whether the tools actually do anything or if they're just props for a costume party.
That's actually exactly where he starts. He's quite dismissive of the fancy stuff. He says if the bright colors and whimsical words of systems like the Golden Dawn get in your way, you can use these simpler tools instead. He claims these simple tools are sufficient to create a universe from the flesh of the gods you struck.
From the flesh of the gods. That is a bit much, isn't it?
It's dramatic. But let's look at the first item, the Atham ritual dagger. He says the handle must be black, the blade at least 6 inches. And here's the kicker. He tells you to ignore all those light neo-pagans who say you shouldn't cause harm. He says if the blade isn't sharp when you bought it, you sharpen it yourself.
I love that. Don't be a pacifist. Just make sure the edge is clean. It's very direct.
But he also warns against the Gothic trend. He says, avoid all these trinkets. No fake gemstones, no overly decorative handles. Just simple.
It's interesting because it contradicts that idea of ritual as theatrical. He's stripping the feeder away to find the utility, like he does with the second tool, the bowl.
Right. He says it has to be solid bronze, tin, or silver, no pleating, and no engravings. He actually mocks the idea that the bowl is symbolically connected to the element of water. He literally says the purpose of the bowl is to hold liquid. That's it.
Brutal. Don't give me the poetry, just give me the vessel.
He's treating these like engineering components. And it continues with the altar. He says it should be waist high, matte black, or unpainted. And get this, he says you can literally just use a piece of particle board or a modified coffee table. He's basically saying, don't go out and spend a fortune, just build a rectangle.
It feels very low energy, in a way, but it's purposeful. He wants to remove distraction. If the altar is too pretty, you're looking at the altar, not the entity.
But then he pivots. He moves from this simple utility to the most massive, heavy concept in the book, the circle. And he completely flips the script on what a circle is.
Yeah, this is a huge moment in the text. He says the common belief that the circle is a protective barrier. To keep things out is a mistake. He says a true evoker knows that even a protected circle can't stop a spirit that is omnipresent.
Wait, so if the circle doesn't protect you, why bother drawing it?
Because it's not a shield, Paco. He calls it a centrifuge of creation. He says the circle is the primordial eternal center from which everything manifests. You aren't hiding inside it. You are using it as a launchpad to pull things into reality.
He literally says the circle is not a prison for the spirit, but a platform for it to enter our world.
That's such a massive reframe. Most people think of ritual magic as trapping, something in a triangle or a circle, like a cage. But Koetting is saying the triangle is just a landing pad.
A landing pad. So the spirit isn't being tricked into a trap? It's being given a place to stand so it can actually talk to you?
Exactly. He calls the myth of the spirit prison a misunderstanding by people who didn't actually know the entities they were calling. He says the spirit enters the triangle because it is the place designated for it to enter. It's about architecture, not incarceration.
It's much more terrifying, honestly. If the circle isn't a wall, then there's nothing stopping the entity from being everywhere at once.
But he also brings in this beautiful, almost manic detail about the mandalas. He says they have to be unique, created specifically for the entity, and this is the part that stresses me out. They have to be drawn between 1 and 12 hours before the ritual.
He's really pushing against what he calls modern practitioners who have lost all patience. He describes people rushing in, throwing a grimoire on a table, scribbling a sigil a minute before they start. He's saying that's not magic. That's just chaos.
Well, I mean, I like a bit of chaos. But I guess if you want the flesh of the gods to manifest, you can't exactly do that while you're still looking for your matches.
No, Paco, you can't. If you're rushing, you're just playing with symbols. You aren't evoking anything.
So, we talked about the tools, the hardware, as Emily puts it. But now we're getting into the actual installation process. He's talking about the labor of the mandala.
And it's more than just drawing a circle, is it? He says, what you sow, you shall reap. He's basically saying if you don't spend the hours placing candles and arranging the altar, you're just playing pretend.
Or at least you're playing pretend very poorly.
Exactly. He says the real approach is to retreat to your temple, draw the mandala, set the altar precisely in the center, and then just wait. He emphasizes the waiting. This ties back to his earlier claim about the fanatical commitment needed for preparatory work. You can't just skip the setup.
But look at what he says about the mandala itself. He's actually being quite chill here. He says it doesn't need to be some hyper-detailed masterpiece. A simple circle, maybe a meter in diameter, is fine.
Yeah, but then he starts adding these. Well, these extreme customizations.
Oh, definitely. He says you can use the names of archangels or sephirot on the boundary. But then, and this is where it gets wild, he suggests using natural components to make it unique to the spirit. For a demonic evocation or something destructive, he literally suggests mixing gasoline and crumbled styrofoam into a thick paste to create a fire mandala.
Gasoline and styrofoam? That's not a ritual, Seth. That's an arson attempt.
It's so visceral. But then he pivots right back to the gentle side. For harmony, love, or health, he says you should dig a shallow trench in the shape of a circle and fill it with water. Or if you're looking for prosperity or social influence, just use a ring of stones around the altar.
It's all very, elemental. It's almost like he's saying the universe is just a series of chemical reactions you can trigger if you use the right catalyst.
And he links this to the laws of the universe, being as unchangeable as gravity. He says if you try to bypass the ritual by, say, going to a church to confess or seek a connection to a planetary sphere, you're just indulging your own prejudices. He claims the principles of evocation work regardless of whether you believe in them or not.
That's a heavy claim. It's like he's saying the magic is a machine, and your faith is just interference.
But check this out. He says when you strip away the fear and doubt, the evocation becomes incredibly easy. He calls it an instrument of the gods that opens gates to their palaces.
Opens gates. Sure. Let's talk about when the gate stays shut. He spends a lot of time on the failed evocation. He says the most common sign of failure is when the neophyte starts the ritual, prepares the space, recites the incantations with all the power, and then just sits there.
And then the doubt creeps in. He says the practitioner loses patience, gets overwhelmed by doubt, and just drags themselves back home.
It sounds so much like a psychological breakdown. I'm sitting in a dark room, nothing is happening, I must be crazy.
But then he introduces this massive split in the schools of magic. This is the core of the tension. On one side, you have the practitioners of sensory magic people who have trained their clairvoyance or astral projection. They see the spirit as it forms out of the smoke of the incense.
And on the other side, he describes this much more aggressive, almost theatrical approach. He mentions people who rely on the orthodoxy of the grimoire, the idea that if you follow the instructions to the letter, the spirit must appear, regardless of your visionary abilities.
Like, I don't need to see you, I just need you to follow the contract.
Exactly. He even takes a lot of jabs at the fanatics of the Orthodox religion, the Catholics, who think you just have to use a more threatening and ultimate tone to force a spirit to appear.
But then he brings it back to that subjective synthesis idea we talked about earlier. He says if you've done the work, if you're radiating the power flowing through you, you will automatically feel the presence.
But there's a catch. He describes this sensory overload state. He says that for those who aren't highly trained in clairvoyance, the ritual triggers a storm of endorphins, dopamine, and neuropeptides.
This is where it gets intense. He says the room starts filling with smoke, voices start screaming from the darkness, shadows crawl toward the circle. The sensory input becomes so overwhelming that the practitioner is on the verge of fainting. And that is when the entity finally appears.
So the magic is basically a controlled seizure, a psychedelic trip triggered by the ritual's intensity?
It's fascinating. He's describing two different ways to reach the same door, one through refined, steady perception, and the other through a total, violent sensory overload that breaks the brain's ability to resist.
One way, you're a surgeon. The other way, you're a wrecking ball. And both end with a demon standing in your living room.
So, we talked about the heavy lifting, the sensory overload, the chemical ritual that breaks the brain. But now, Koetting moves into the aftermath, and honestly, it's kind of a warning.
A warning about what? Like, don't summon the demon because it might eat your soul?
No, even worse. He says if you actually win, if you command the spirit, and it obeys, the next few weeks are going to be extremely restless.
Restless how?
He says the money you asked for will come to you suddenly, but it'll leave you just as suddenly. One day, everyone thinks you're your best friend, and the next, you're a sore on the face of the earth. You'll experience great love and great loss.
Man, that sounds exhausting. It's like winning the lottery and having the ticket blow away in the wind 5 minutes later.
It's the cost of the extreme approach we were just talking about. You play with these massive, unstable forces, and you can't expect your bank account or your social life to stay stable.
Exactly. It's the instability of the unpredictable success. But then he shifts gears into something I find really interesting. He talks about how modern occultists have moved away from the religious intensity. He says most people prefer a scientific approach now.
Well, yeah. We like data. We like to be able to say, I did X and Y happened, without needing to fall into a state of religious ecstasy.
Right, but Koetting argues that this scientific detachment is actually a problem. He says most practitioners lack the religious fervor needed to actually trigger those chemical reactions in the brain ones that lead to the hallucinations that match the astral phenomena.
Hallucinations. See? There it is. That's the skeptic in me poking through. He's basically saying, if you aren't losing your mind, you aren't doing it right.
Hey, I've been there. Sometimes a little self-induced psychosis is exactly what the doctor ordered for a Friday night.
But look at what he says happens when you do hit that state. He says the control slips away from the magician. The descending of the Holy Spirit is so overwhelming that it prevents the ego from asserting itself. You aren't commanding a servant anymore. You're being flooded.
That's a huge contradiction to what we were saying about the architect angle. We started this episode talking about the magician as a commander, an engineer of reality. But here he's saying the successful ritual actually destroys the commander's control.
It's a paradox. You use your will to build the platform, but the goal is to let the will be overridden by the force you've summoned.
And he brings in this story to illustrate the communication problem. He tells this story about a practitioner, a gentleman, who had been doing this for 20 years who used a pendulum to talk to demons.
A pendulum? Really? That sounds like something my grandma would use to see if I'm lying about eating the last cookie.
Exactly. Koetting actually says, and I quote, "I couldn't help but roll my eyes and sigh." He compares it to using a Ouija board as a teenager.
I mean, he's not wrong. It sounds a bit amateurish for someone with 20 years of experience.
But watch how the technique works. The man draws a circle on a piece of paper, divides it into 4 parts, writes "Yes" at the top and "No" on the sides. He performs a meditation, breathes life into a sigil, and suddenly they both feel the demon crawling into the room like a fog.
That's the part that gets me. They both felt it. The presence was undeniable. The hardware worked.
But the pendulum, it didn't move. Not once. The man asks the demon if it can perform the task, and the pendulum stays dead still.
Wait, so the demon was there, the energy was heavy, the fog was in the room, but the physical tool didn't react?
Right. And the man's explanation is wild. He says this is called a non-material manifestation. It didn't move physically, but if it had moved, it would have moved toward UA sex. He felt the magnetism of the entire room shifting toward that UX's side.
Okay, so the magic is happening, but the physics are optional? That sounds like a convenient way to claim success when your tools aren't working.
But Koetting uses this to make his main point. He says that after seeing this, he realized that relying on a pendulum is like walking with crutches when your broken leg healed years ago. He says people are so desperate for signs and cards, in smoke, in the very stars that they refuse to trust their own raw, intuitive senses.
He's saying the real secret isn't a tool at all. He says the greatest secret to communicating with spirits is simply to quiet the heart, relax the mind, and let your senses perceive what is already there.
So no pendulum, no Ouija, no scientific checking, just sitting in the dark and hoping you don't get too spooked?
He says that while that won't make the spirit visible right away, it opens the path for visions to come. He's pushing for a move away from the mechanics and back into a state of pure sensory receptivity.
It's a total abandonment of the engineer model. He wants you to stop being the architect and start being the antenna.
And that's the tension we're seeing. The book is caught between these two worlds. The ritual as a precise, mechanical command, and the ritual as a way to dissolve the self so that the other can finally be heard.
I need to stretch. My neck is actually cramping from leaning in so far.
Same. Let's grab a quick water and reset.